background is horrible.
Lovely to see you here for this panel on the Earth Charter and global ethics. Sorry we had to move it, but thank you for adjusting. We're going to begin, myself and then Rick Clugston, with a brief history of the Charter, and then we will move towards the way the Charter has engaged the world's religions, with Michel Slavi, with major issues like climate change, and with religious grassroots environmental activism in Sri Lanka with Dr. Ariadne. How many of you are familiar with the Earth Charter? Okay, so that's wonderful. We'll just be brief in some ways then about the history, but we have a short PowerPoint to show you on that. There was a trajectory for this effort before Rio 1992, before the Earth Summit. It didn't work to have an Earth Charter at that council, that conference, but in the 10 years after it, there was a huge drafting process, very inclusive, led by Stephen Rockefeller. Several of us here on the panel were involved in the drafting committee, and then there was commissioners from around the world, including Dr. Ariadne, that brought this out onto all of the major continents. I do want to just say that Stephen Rockefeller, as directing the Earth Charter, was trained, like myself, as a historian of religions at Columbia University. He happens to also have a Buddhist practice, and he has a great appreciation for Dewey, who had a huge sensibility about nature and about pragmatism, of course. But Stephen was an amazing leader for this Earth Charter drafting process, and he really drew on his understanding of world's religions. That's what I want to bring into the mix here. And his Buddhism gave him that equanimity, that patience to deal with huge input at late hours of night all around the world in this drafting process. We had a series of conferences, some of you know, at Harvard in the mid-90s, 96, 97, 98, where we brought together representatives of the world's religions and scholars of the world's religions to examine ways in which these traditions can speak to our environmental crisis. What are their views of nature? What are potential environmental ethics from these traditions? We published 10 volumes. There's a large website which you can access, yale.edu, Religion and Ecology. But at all of those conferences, we had drafts of the Earth Charter. And so the different world religions were weighing in from their perspectives on the actual drafting process. Every single word was vetted. As I say, it makes it a very comprehensive document, and the most input from civil society of any documents around the world. Now, it has been endorsed by UNESCO and by IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature. Brendan Mackey here and Ron Engel made this huge effort at this IUCN, the largest Congress of environmental organizations in the world, and it was adopted in Thailand thanks to their efforts. But it's also been endorsed by thousands of groups, individuals, institutions around the world. And this next year we're going to be celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Charter, which came into being in 2000. And there'll be some celebrations around the world. Rick Clugston maybe can share some of those plans with you. Now, I want to speak then to set a context briefly for the sense of this Charter as a global ethics, the sense of its importance, its significance, certainly here in a parliament like this that is searching for ways in which we can honor diversity and difference and yet our common values, our common future, the sense that the earth itself is what is calling us towards this great commonality. So this is a first, I would say, it's a moment, the first time humans have ever tried to create a global ethics. It's on the level of significance as the time of the French Revolution, the Declaration of Rights, the time of the Declaration of Independence, and so on. And as well, there was a 60-year anniversary celebration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights just a few years ago at UNESCO in Paris that arose in response to the horrific violations of human rights from World War II, in particular in Europe. And that effort, which was also drawing on different religious perspectives, was trying to highlight the dignity, the value of the human worth, the independence, the liberties, the freedoms that humans aspire to around the world. So that is a declaration of independence in that same spirit of the Enlightenment period, the French Revolution, American Revolution, democratic principles being spread around the world. The difference here is this is a declaration of interdependence, of our profound reliance on Earth systems, on one another, and our responsibility to future generations. So this represents a huge shift in human consciousness, if you will, from radical individualism and independence to radical interdependence and interconnection of all life forms, of humans, other species, and future generations. And I would also just say, I think one of the great differences of this, even in the global ethics that the Parliament in '93 adopted through Hans Kung's important efforts, and even this recent effort at a Charter for Compassion, in many ways those remain much more anthropocentric, much more human-centered. The environment is a bit in the background rather than in the foreground. And what I want to illustrate in the structure of the Charter and in the ways that we were trying to think it through as we created this from nothing, and while it's imperfect, I think it is very comprehensive. But I want to help us understand the thinking that was, as I say, very collective, very collaborative, certainly contested, but there's a difference here in the primacy of the Earth. And that's what I want to illustrate. So it begins with a sense of the Earth and ecological system, that we have to preserve that integrity. And the environmental crisis then is the major crisis context of our times. And the presumption of the Charter is that unless we preserve ecological systems, everything is secondary. As the statue out there says, there's no jobs on a dead planet, where they're protesting the non-efforts at climate change and so on. The second area, and I'm going to return to the preamble in a moment, but what I'm discussing right now is the inner dynamics of the Earth Charter. And that is these three areas of ecological integrity, social economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace. And the idea then is that economic and social justice fit into the context of preserving, protecting, enhancing the flourishing of ecosystems. Water, air, soil. These are the pulsating elements which will sustain all of life. If they go down, everything goes down. So the sense then of social justice and economic justice, the human concerns, have got to be related to environmental concerns. The sense of creating new economic systems, that ecology and economy are one system. As Thomas Berry used to say, there's no sustainable economy without a sustainable ecology.